In the world of superheroes, Dr. Bruce Banner is cursed and blessed, I guess, with the superpower of turning into a giant, huge rage beast whenever he's angry. Anger is the trigger for his destructive powers. Well, you're probably familiar with that from movies and such. If you are a real nerd like some of us, you know that the original Hulk character in the world of comic books actually grows in his strength and his power depending on how angry he gets. The angrier he is, the more powerful he is. Hey guys, it's Dwight. I'm here with the Wiseman Method podcast this week. David Livingston, Claire Wiseman, and I are going to have a discussion about anger and the relationship it has to addiction. I think you might be surprised to hear some of the things that we discuss and come up with in this talk. Anger is not just a trigger for bad things to happen. It's actually oftentimes its own sort of superpower. And how do we use that in a healthy way for what it is meant to be used for, instead of letting it just become the rage monster that it can be? It's a really great conversation, really great principles involved, and I'm excited to have all of you be a part of it. Well, I was really intrigued when Marina brought up the idea of anger. It got me thinking about anger and all the different ways that it connects with addiction. And so where does that take us? What do you guys think when you think of anger and addiction?
You want to start, Claire?
No, you go for it.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy. So I think it's probably the single most important parts of addiction. So here's how I conceive of it, and I kind of break it down. So if you think of what a craving is, okay, so the difference between having just thoughts and feelings coming through us and feeling what people call a craving, right? It's kind of it's a different word for it would be kind of a compulsive or an obsessive state, meaning that there's an intensity to the thoughts and the feelings that people feel driven, right? So that there's a sense of like being gripped by something and that it moves you towards it. And having talked to literally thousands of people, there's always a part of them that knows and wishes they weren't about to do, something that might be not good for them. Or, there's some aspect, there's usually some ambivalence. So what's the driving force? Well, if you think of what anger is primarily, almost entirely intensity. Okay, so what happens in addiction is there is unmet needs, right? Okay, so if you think of a baby, or you start right at the most primitive picture, babies cry with great intensity until their needs are met, until they're changed or fed or held or whatever it is they need. Okay, so what happens is that template lives on in our lives. So what happens with cravings is, and it's why AA talks about, make sure you're not hungry, make sure you're sleeping, because these are the primary needs, right? And they carry on throughout life. So as we get older, it gets more complex, right? So there's need for good dependency, there's need for, varied experiences, there's need to feel well connected in the world, and there's a need to feel creative. Okay, so, really at the end of, when people are utilizing their anger well, they are utilizing it protectively. Okay, that's one of the big flips in addiction, is instead of utilizing it to say, what the hell, I don't care, you say kind of protectively and have other avenues in which to creatively find outlets for what you're needing. You call up a friend, you go to a game, you go for a walk. You have a whole routine of things you do that help you enjoy yourself and not get into trouble. It doesn't get sort of limited to this one activity that, where all of that intensity gets driven. And that's really what a treatment is. And getting to know your anger is getting to know your needs, getting to know your creativity. And one of the worst things we've done in treatment is try to get rid of it. You get rid of it, you will push it underground, and it will come back with a fury. And what you tend to get is people who are compliant, say, okay, yeah, it's not good, instead of really getting to know that part of them and helping them expand it into a more creative life. That is, so at any rate, that's, as I said in the up front, I'm going to, I have a lot to say about this, but as a beginning statement, there it is.
I feel like we tend to forget that it's a primary emotion and treat it like it's a bad behavior. Anger itself, that is. I mean, that just because anger can fuel so many aggressive behaviors, we tend to associate that with the emotion itself. I really identify with what you're saying as far as the functionality of an emotion, right? Is if it leads me to be protective. And I guess you're talking about being actually protective, because if I walk down the street and I just try to be a big, tough, scary guy, that's not really protecting me as much as if I have a healthy support system of people who care for me and love for me, right? That actually protects me more. So it seems like that's what you're talking about, is the difference between actual protection and unhealthy attempts at protection, right?
Yeah. I mean it more as a discerning element. Like if someone comes around with a drug that's terrible, it's like, get that the hell away from me. I'm not interested in that, right? And so that the aggression is used creatively, right? So if you take if you try to take away someone's anger, you will deaden them. You will just end. But if you find ways and you help them expand that aggressive, not aggressive in the sense of violence or destructiveness, but aggressive in the sense of aliveness, right? Where you feel like you're excited, you're interested, you're growing, you're learning, you're that's the function of what that element is supposed to, So part of what happens is people don't know how to be alive in more creative and interesting ways. And when they find that, and when that gets better, it can really make a difference in terms of how they relate to that part of themselves.
Anger can be a very healthy feeling. It's a basic human emotion, a response of our sympathetic nervous system. So we all have anger, but there is a huge difference between anger and rage. Mm-hmm. And I think unmet needs can turn into rage. So it's being able to use the anger wisely, because often is a justifiable response of something that happened that was unfair or was not right. So it's really how to manage that, natural response in a healthy way.
And being able to communicate that feeling of anger in a way that a lot of times when you work with communications and even like relationships, you need to be able to express anger in a way that can be productive. In fact, that's one of the more damaging things to a relationship, is when we can't express ourselves, right? Or either we don't express ourselves at all, or we express ourselves only in rage, where we have the heart rate pumping and we're overly aggressive and expressive of anger. So I guess either like too little or none at all. No, that was the same thing. Either too little or too much. As far as that expression, it can go either way. And trying to find that healthy expression of being able to tell someone, I'm angry at you, or even to express with ourselves, right, that feeling of anger in a way that can be productive.
And I think in a relationship, I think, we as human beings, we all want to be, connected. We all want to be heard. And I think when anger is present, or overwhelming anger, the opposite happens. You're pushing somebody away. Somebody else shuts down. Then they go into the protective mode. You're angry, I'm protecting myself. Then I think the communication there, takes a halt. You can't go further than that.
Well, and David, you bring up an interesting criticism of sometimes in treatment and psychotherapy approaches, we can make the mistake of trying to say, let's get rid of anger if it were possible, which as you said, that would deaden you. And I was just thinking about, like, what does opiate abuse do to you emotionally? It deadens you, right? So are we continuing a continuation of symptoms after literal chemical sobriety is there?
Well, I mean, most of the people that I meet who are doing well in life are pretty intense people, and they're just spreading it around. But so the idea is to have our aggression, and I don't mean that again because that word carries so many different,
connotations.
Yeah, connotations and different meaning for everyone. So I'm certainly not talking about violence, and I'm not talking about any sort of destructiveness. I'm talking about a type of aliveness, and but they're profoundly connected. So if you can bring, what our educational system and what growing up is supposed to do is, you join the soccer team and you learn to paint and you learn to hang out with your friends and so there's this multiple ways and or whatever it is you like to do, and you create this life where there's these outlets, and then you find that and it's a creative life. So and our anger helps us sort of, when it's used well, when it's I'm kind of talking around this, but any emotion can be too much, right? So if sometimes I'll work with someone who is can be obsessive, and they'll tell you how much they just love someone and love them. And I'm like, so there's nothing about this person you don't like, right? Which is impossible. So anything, like you're saying about rage, like rage, if it goes too far, it cuts us off from a more integrated life, right? So that we can't see what we like and what's good and what's helpful. It colors things so strongly that it can make it hard to sort of see the whole. And, I think ultimately that's really what therapy is about. And the end of addiction is a creative, alive life. It's not a life just struggling to stay sober. It's a life in which you have things to do that you're interested in, avenues to exist.
And I think too, when you want to refer anger with addiction, a lot of people that start abusing substance are truly masking the anger within, and that anger that they don't know how to manage, what to do with it, and that anger that has become self-destructive. They take a numbing device. It's actually a little break from that constant need, of being angry with something, towards something. And the problem with that is after using, a numbing device for years, sometimes even decades, once you remove the drugs, you have those issues that were never, dealt with. And sometimes they become overwhelming. And I think that rehab centers trying to dig all of those things as this person is just coming out of the covers, it becomes too much.
Yeah.
It becomes more than they can handle. They don't have the tools to manage that in first place. Mm-hmm. And after all these years, now they're even more fragile. So I think sitting, expressing all those inner feelings to others, that puts you in such a transparent state when you're already so fragile and scared of how you're going to deal with that. It's a bit much. And you have to understand something as well. A lot of these people have anger towards things that happened when they were young enough that they did not have the tools to even verbalize what happened to them. So, where anger turn into lack of self-love. So it gets confusing. It gets lost, and the feeling itself changes because it snowballs from one mishandled feeling to the other.
I remember speaking with a colleague of mine. I worked at a community mental health center. He ran the residential unit for the men's unit. We had a men's and a women's residential unit where people were there primarily for addiction reasons. Anyway, we were talking about a study where they were talking about trauma and how there had been a specific study with people who were going through that treatment, and I think they were just reading some of the statistics of how many people reported forms of trauma that contributed to their addiction. And I always remember, now I don't remember the exact statistic. It was basically, it said somewhere around, 1/3 to 1/2 of men in treatment have had trauma. And he laughed and said, yeah, I think that statistic is actually 100%. And his experience was that. And I have always since then tried to be conscious of what you're talking about, Claire, is when someone becomes sober, all of a sudden, here come all those feelings rushing back. And many, many, many times there's some kind of trauma or some kind of hurt, and that anger is there. And how do we deal with that, right? And how do we put that to a use where it can become, I like how you put it as well, David, when you talk about creative aggression, to say, I'm angry that this thing happened to me. How do I get creative about that instead of going back to relapse?
So you move at a pace that they, in many ways, lead, right? Because what's on their mind is usually most important. And flip side of anger tends to be guilt. So you'll tend to see, that slip back and forth. People sort of are hard on themselves and then went out of that state, or then are angry at other people. And, over time, the potential is that whatever the trauma was or whatever the loss was, whether it's, conflict oriented or if there's deficits, the ability to recognize what those needs were, they still exist today. If you grow up lonely and not well connected, you still need to be, you need to be not lonely today, or certainly not as lonely, and you need to be better connected. So the discerning part of the anger is it reminds you that you needed something, right? That there's an intensity to it because it mattered, right? That's the core of anger, is people only are upset because something matters. But once you connect it to what it was that mattered to them, they don't really need the anger because they've gotten to what it is that mattered. So if you don't help them through and get to know the anger, it's harder to connect it to what mattered. And once they start to remember and realize what mattered then, or what happened in the trauma, whether it's safety or something else, because they still need it now. So you don't even have to go back, per se, and reopen all that. You just have to get to the anger and the needs because they exist now too. And if they start to get met now, then the trauma is getting taken care of because the needs are getting met differently now. And that's actually how you work through a trauma. You don't go back and just open it all up for the sake of remembering it. I mean, sometimes people need to do that to some degree just to, because it's on their mind, and certainly you don't inhibit that if that's coming out of them. However, the benefit is when they start to live a life that doesn't look like that now, and their life looks very different now, then they start to feel like the trauma is truly getting put in the past. And I'm not sure that gets differentiated well.
It goes back to your example of a baby. If you'd never seen a baby before and you see someone comfort one, first of all, it's one of the most abrasive cries in the world, right? The baby's crying. It's really, really hard to deal with. And then someone comes up and gives a bottle or a change or a love, and it just stops, right? That would seem like a miracle, right? And so it reminds me of that. What you're saying is if we can find the need, the anger isn't as necessary and it can abate.
That's it. That's that's where creativity is. Oh, right. So once the baby's changed, it can play. Once it's fed, it can go off and right. It's so then you start to get this integrated, expanding, process.
Would you say that we're more at risk for problems with drugs and alcohol when our needs aren't met, but especially if we feel that we are not cared for, that our needs are not respected, not important?
No, I think self-love, self-care is again, it's another basic need we have. Mm-hmm. I mean, when we as children did not receive the love, the assistance, when we felt insecure about, the ones that are supposed to protect us, I think the whole world around us becomes scary. And that can lead to, again, the need of numbing device. Can lead to someone believing they are not deserving of happiness, not deserving of having, a healthy life. And there's a lot of self-sabotage that goes on. So absolutely, I think the first few years of a child's life is detrimental for their, sustained mental health for the rest of their life and relationships.
Yeah. It sounds like one of the healthy ways to cope with anger then that we're saying is being able to communicate. Finding safe people and then communicating with them for our needs has got to be one big important way to deal with that anger.
Yeah, and not just communicate, but feeling heard, feeling understood, I think is, and again, going back to addiction and treatment centers is, we go always back to the same sentence, is concentrating on addiction and concentrating on the person. The moment they feel heard and understood, I think, there is a awakening. There is a trust. There is a bond that gets created. And so many of the people we see have been to 20, 30 rehabs and never felt heard or understood. They just felt like another addict sitting in the chair, having to do the exact same steps of everybody else.
When you see people go through a complicated system, whether it's the criminal justice system or a lot of treatment centers, unfortunately, fall into this too, where there's a lot of harshness, and then they just associate that system with all the rest of the world that has done, has been harsh already. And why would I not be angry with my therapist if I'm sitting in a room assigned to this person who's part of this system? Or why would I not be angry at the person who's telling me, yeah, here's what you need to do, fill out these forms and do this and that, and then get sober and come in here and take some drug tests and all that. Why would I not be angry if I'm being treated the same way that I've always been treated?
Correct. And then there is that patients, when they come into treatment, often expect not to be treated well, that things are not going to work. So when you start, responding to that lack of expectation of success, you're empowering that feeling of negativeness that, overtakes the whole treatment. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember a day when I was talking to somebody who was on probation for drug use, and as a client who came to see me, and they were talking about some of the negatives about their probation system. They go in and, they have to do something and then drug test, and no one was listening to them. And I just remember listening to the story and then going like, wow, that sucks. That would piss me off too. And the person, you could tell they were very surprised, first of all. And I didn't go and say, oh, you should, forget those people and you should go relapse. I didn't, say any of that, but just to say, yeah, you have a right to be angry about that. That was poor treatment. To be treated that way would also make me angry. It was amazing. Just right then we had a bond right away, just because we admitted anger was okay,
Right. Because it's, again, a lot of times anger is justifiable more often than not. It's just how we handle that. When I hire, in the hospital, we have what we call patient assistant. And this is the person that they will meet when they arrive to the hospital. That will take them to the room. They will help them with their paperwork. That will be between them and the hospital staff. Something a little more personal. I tell them, when they walk in here, everything that you say and everything that you are is what's going to dictate the rest of the treatment. Mm-hmm. Because what we sell is a promise. And once they come here, they are wondering if that promise is going to happen. And because that has failed them so many times in so many different places, they're waiting for that, lack of compassion. They're waiting for that, well, that's not what's going to happen. Once that happens, their whole demeanor changes. And then it becomes a fight from there on. There's the question mark. So it's very, very important that, people feel heard, people feel that they are being treated as a unique individual.
What's going on that you're upset? What happened? The appreciation when you hear them, figure out, most every time, whatever is going on can be pretty quickly and easily remedied. Often it's just some confusion about one thing or another, or, poor communication. And often people expect nothing. So, or expect to be treated poorly. So they're so grateful when you just clear the air and figure out whatever it is that's upsetting them, and you get things right, and then things feel solid and they know what to expect. And you see anxiety go down, you see people relax, you see recovery start to improve much faster. And that should be the treatment model. Really attunement is what therapy is about, like you're saying, but like you're both saying. And so when that happens, people get better much quicker.
I like this idea too that's forming that when we have anger, especially if we don't have skills, then our instinct often is to either pull away or lash out at ourselves. But what we're forming really here, I think, is the idea that if I'm angry, then I should figure out and question, well, what are my needs and how can I really meet those? And use that so kind of as the spur that pushes us onward, right? To say, oh, okay, I'm angry. That means I need something. If I am in my mind, and I love this image. I keep going back to the crying baby. If there's a little bit emotional baby inside me somewhere that's crying, what does it need? How do I feed that baby in a way that's going to help it? And so finding people who I can trust. And this is something I'm a big consumer advocate when it comes to addiction treatment as well as any mental health care, right? Is to say, I want to find people who will respect me because that's who can help me. They can't help me if they don't care about me as an individual and if they don't have actually their own skills to listen to me and treat me like an individual.
Talking about love, and as you're saying, Dwight, about, being treated as an individual, when somebody is angry or upset about something, and you really take the time to listen to them, understand it, parse them with it, go through and do whatever you can to help them with their concern or what's upsetting them, they feel deeply loved and cared about. Mm-hmm. People who don't ever feel deeply loved have never been loved when they're angry. If you're never taken care of and understood, you don't feel deeply rooted. That is the essence of secure attachment. There's no secure attachment if you can't be attached when you're both happy and joyful and easy to get along with, and when you're also ornery, upset about something, and need somebody's understanding and attention at that time. We need both forever. And secure attachment, which is such a part of the problem with addiction, is people don't have a deep sense of trust and that they can attach deeply. And when you can attach deeply and you feel like your nervous system relaxes, you don't need to change your consciousness or get out of your own, nervous system or change it with a drug, because it relaxes by itself. So, to the degree that so anyway, it's just kind of another way of saying what we're all talking about.
No, I think that's incredibly important. Incredibly important to be able to relax with somebody, to be able to fully trust somebody, that's being in peace, not just with somebody else, but within. I think that's incredibly important.
It's mostly when people go, I think, to treatments, they're constantly told that they've got to adjust to the program rather than the program. Yeah, there's always some sort of a program going on, and there's things you have to do to participate wherever you're at. That's always part of it. So I don't want to be naive, but primarily it should be more the other way, where the therapeutic part of it is adjusting to your needs, figuring that out, understanding it. And then you get this true symbiotic relationship that's back and forth. That's much better.
I think it's just important, Dwight, in the end of all this, that people understand that, again, being angry, it's natural, it's healthy, but when you're angry, you don't need to engage in destructive or aggressive behavior. You can be angry in so many healthy ways. Be very clear with yourself and others what you're angry about. Try not to deflect, because then you're not solving the issue. I think honesty and timing also can really help you get over that anger and move forward. So is, learning how to talk about it, being honest about it, not use any destructive or aggressive behavior that is going to push those around you further away from you, and not allow them to hear what you have to say.
Confusion about anger, I would say probably one of the biggest causes of anxiety, depression, somatic problems, a need to sort of find a way out of that discomfort. What we need to pay attention to is being destructive to ourselves or others. That should become really it's really how I think about it. Anger doesn't worry me. Just when someone's angry, one, they're vulnerable. Two, they're actually telling me something that matters to them. Once you really understand it's the word destructive, that is far more useful. You can relax around that part of you and get to know yourself in a way that allows for you to be healthier in pretty much all ways.
I think absolutely.
And we're going to leave it there. The show, as always, is hosted by Claire Wiseman, founder of the Wiseman Method, and David Livingston, our chief therapist. Anything we can do to help you, check us out at opioids.com for the Wiseman Method Clinic and Rapid Detox Program. You can also call anytime at 1-800-423-2482 if you have questions about opioid addiction. Our music is the song Medical by Clean Mind Sounds. The Wiseman Method podcast is produced by Pop Color Productions, a company that helps you to start up your podcast, especially if you are a helping professional in healthcare or anywhere else where you are trying to help people and reach out to them. As always, make sure that you're getting help when you need it. Make sure that you're being safe, taking care of yourself. And as always, remember to ask questions. When you ask questions, you get answers. And whenever you can find answers, you can find hope. Have a good week. We'll be back again soon with discussions about addiction and recovery.
Now might be a really good time for you to get angry. That's my secret, Captain. I'm always angry.